had tried to obtain an injunction against me, an injunction that would, legally prohibit me from protesting. And they were told, very clearly, well, there's this thing called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and Mr. Edgar has every right to do what he's doing. The only circumstance under which you can force an end to his protest is if he's found guilty of some kind of criminal act in the course of his protest. That's the only circumstance where you can have a legal order preventing him from protesting. So that's why I was arrested. It was all about trying to get an injunction to put an end to my protest, to say nothing of possibly put me in jail for a few years, because these were criminal charges. They carry jail terms. I believe the maximum jail term for disrupting the order and solemnity of church services is 2 years in jail. So theoretically, I could have been sentenced to a 2-year jail term if I'd been found guilty. But of course I wasn't, because it was total bullshit. I told the Crown prosecutor, well, I'm out on the street, and the church sanctuary is mostly brick. There's only a few windows, and those windows are narrow slit windows, some of them high above street level, some of them blocked, such as this one here. This window is blocked by a memorial to firemen who were killed when the church's transsexual organist burned down the previous incarnation of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. This window here is about the only one where someone might be able to see the top of my head as I walk by, although even that's debatable because it's the bottom of the window is higher than my head. Those two up there, forget it. They're way too high to see me through. There's no upper level of church to look down through. This window in the summer is blocked by the leaves on the bush, and it's got stained glass in it, so again, can't be seen. You can be sure the building's reasonably well soundproofed. So in terms of being heard, even if I was making noise, which I'm not, chances of actually hearing that noise are minimal. I asked the prosecution witnesses, can you hear me when church services are going on? And I believe they truthfully answered that they couldn't. And then I asked, well, can you see me when church services are happening? And one of them, Val Bourdon, said that he could. And so I said, well, how can you see me? He said, oh, well, people stare at you through the lobby windows. And what he means is people stare at me through that window there, which is true, actually. Good day, sir. So yes, some members of the church do stare through that window when I'm protesting. But they don't hold services in the lobby. And that was my next question. I says, well, do you hold church services in the lobby? And of course, he came back with this long, drawn-out, dejected no. And of course, the fact that someone might look out the lobby window and see my protest and maybe not feel very comfortable has zero impact on the actual religious service. They're not even supposed to be there when the service is going on. If they want to be in the service, they can't be in the lobby. They have to be in the sanctuary. So, they couldn't hear me, they couldn't see me. So the next question, of course, is, well, has a service ever actually been disrupted? The charge is for disrupting a church service. And so both prosecution witnesses, Val Bourdon and Jeremy Searle, whined about how terribly uncomfortable they felt inside the church while I was outside protesting. So it's like it was all about their personal discomfort with the fact that I was protesting outside. Well, excuse me, the law does not prohibit making people feel uncomfortable. It's all about whether or not a service was disrupted or not. So my next question was, well, has a service, ever stopped and started again as a result of my protest? And one or both prosecution witnesses admitted that no, and the service has never actually stopped or started again as a result of my protest. So, 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game, as they say. When it became clear that no service had ever been disrupted, that I can't be seen or heard from within the church when the service is going on. The Crown Prosecutor, who was a honorable young rookie prosecutor, excuse me, a little Freudian slip there. He was a rookie protester, young guy. He behaved very honorably and basically said to the judge, well, I have to prove 4 or 5 points of law here. I've been unable to. I would like the defendant to make a motion of non-suit. And then what he meant by that was that he wanted me to make a motion to the effect that he had not proved his case and that therefore the trial should end, that I should be acquitted because he had not proved his case. Well, being who I am, I wanted to actually present a defense just to expose, just to what extent, Jeremy Searle and Val Bourdon and other leading members of the church had, tried to pervert the course of justice. I wanted to present a defense that would, present information showing just how messed up they were. And the judge actually granted that request. Constitution says you have right to a full and complete defense, and I hadn't presented any defense up to that point. I'd simply cross-examined the prosecution witnesses in the prosecution stage of the trial. So the court date was set for sometime in December of 2003, if I remember correctly. So that's the thing is I didn't learn that I'd been acquitted in April until the court date in December was approaching, and I contacted the court to just verify the date and time and so on of the trial date, only to be told, well, you've been acquitted. And so what happened is that even though the prosecutor had asked me to file a motion of non-suit, and I'd politely declined and said I wanted to present a defense, and the judge had granted me the right to make a defense and had even set a trial date for doing so, it turns out that a few days after that court date, the prosecutor, without my knowledge, approached the judge and called for my acquittal, and the judge granted that acquittal. So I was acquitted, some months before learning that I was acquitted. So again, it all just more illustration of how Montreal Unitarians do a terrible, terrible job of living up to their religious rhetoric, which calls for, amongst other things, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and so on.
What is that?
I'm protesting against prejudice and bigotry on the part of members of this church, leaders of this church.
Is this the Unitarian Church?
Yes, it's the Unitarian Church of Montreal.
It's a church. I mean, what's so...
Well,
bigotry sucks. I mean, are they a bunch of bigots or what?
I'm not saying they're all a bunch of bigots. It says Unitarian prejudice and bigotry sucks. So it's saying when Unitarians engage in prejudice and bigotry, that kind of sucks. And yes, some of them, including the minister, or at least the previous minister, have in fact engaged in prejudice and bigotry, as well as other Unitarians in other churches. So anyway, that's not the only reason I'm protesting, but that's what this sign's about.
Seems like you're all alone.
Is there something wrong with that?
No, there's nothing wrong with that. No, but
no, I'm all alone. I don't try to have other people with me. In fact, I've had some other people over the years offer to protest with me, and I've actually told them I prefer to protest alone because I can sort of control the situation. It's these.
Anyway, good luck to you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. My daughter in there.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, older gentleman here asking about my picket sign in my right hand, which says Unitarian prejudice and bigotry sucks you asterisk you. Yes, there's a grammatical error. Oh, that's interesting. You could have gone around the other side, sir. So, Anyhow, this guy walking quickly sort of thrust by me on the inner side of the sidewalk. I guess, it could be that my picket sign was somewhat blocking the outer part of the sidewalk, but he could have just alerted me to his presence and asked me to step out of the way. I would have. In any case, getting back to my little chat with the gentleman there, he began what Unitarian Universalists would call a free and responsible search for the truth and meaning of my protest. So I answered his questions. And yeah, he started off, somewhat in denial. Well, it's a church, how can there be prejudice and bigotry? It's like, well, excuse me, it's like lots of churches have prejudice and bigotry, I don't mind saying, some of them even worse than the Unitarian Church, either in terms of the church locally or the greater religious community. But the fact remains is that there is a certain amount of prejudice and bigotry in the Unitarian Church, and it's not limited to anti-religious intolerance and bigotry. That's probably the main intolerance and bigotry that's found within the church. But south of the border in the United States, there's also a fair bit of anti-conservative, anti-Republican Party intolerance and bigotry. So in other words, criticism of conservatives and the Republican Party that goes beyond just, criticizing specific issues, but essentially descending into actual prejudice and bigotry against the, Republicans. And so there's that, because most Unitarian Universalists, like myself, lean left, politically speaking. And as a result of that, some of the more hard left Unitarian Universalists can and do engage in bigotry towards Republicans. In fact, I did a little blog post about that recently. So that's another form of intolerance and bigotry, prejudice and bigotry. There's a fair bit of classism and elitism too, because Unitarian Universalists, tend to be upper middle class white people, and they look down their noses at